Chief David Mitchell has stood by this Maryland chapter C.O.P.S since its infancy. He was one of the original formers of Maryland chapter C.O.P.S because he in his heart has such a special place for families, survivors, and always keeps our fallen heroes in his prayers and in his heart. I personally met Dave Mitchell 20 years ago, around 2 o'clock in the morning. Right after our son was murdered, he met with us, which is something he did not have to do, and I will never forget that. And the first thing he said is, "Your son will never be forgotten." And at that time, those words didn't mean a whole lot because I wasn't even sure of my own name at that time. But I've come to learn, and I now can give that message to all of our survivors, that your family member, your loved one will never be forgotten. So thank you, Dave Mitchell, by leading by example. You'll never know how much we appreciate it. So I'm going to present to you our speaker tonight, Chief Dave Mitchell.
Thank you, Sue.
Absolutely.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Good evening.
Well, I wish I had a voice like Dave Gray. Outstanding. Outstanding. And I come from a patriotic family. My dad was career Army, jumped on D-Day, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. And my brother did 2 tours as a combat medic in Vietnam, dust off, medevacs. And along with my mother, they're all buried in Arlington National Cemetery. My uncle, who served under George Patton in tanks in World War II. And over the years, well, my dad retired from the Army the year I graduated high school, and I growing up in military life, I knew what to expect. I also knew it didn't pay much, and there were certain risks. So I talked to him about it, and I decided I'd do something a little safer. So I joined the Prince George's County Police Department. November 8, 1971. This is my 50th year. And folks, it goes quick. Thank you, they taught me well. I've been blessed to have the career I have, and the memories that I cherish. Of course, not all of them are sweet ones. Some are bitter. I was 22 years old, and I loved the job so much, still do. But I loved the job so much, I couldn't believe I was getting paid to do it. And you remember. And those of you who have served and are still serving know that feeling. Little did I know, February 20th, 1973, about 8 p.m., one of the heroes on my squad that I always looked up to was shot to death on a burglary in progress call in Chilton, Maryland. And I was part of that ensuing gunfight. Almost got hit, fortunately did not. But Carol David Garrison was taken from us that night. And the agency loved all of us. The department loved us. There's no doubt about that. But the department was not very sophisticated in handling line of duty deaths. So as a result, you go to work the next day. And I did. I was a mess. And so was my squad, by the way. We didn't know any better. We didn't know it was common to have bad dreams, nightmares, riding around, you just start crying. But I can tell you, I know what it's like to be a survivor in the sense of losing coworkers. And I've lost many over the years, as many of you have. We were blessed to have cops born in Prince George's County in 1984. And it was a group of survivors with Susie Sawyer who said, there needs to be something more than what we do. And cops came about. I worked a lot of COPS events over the years, and of course the memorials in Washington, D.C., where today the names of over 23,000 men and women who have made the ultimate sacrifice adorn that sacred ground in Washington, D.C. Like you, many of those names I know. People I've served with. Like you, they were loved ones. Maybe not by blood, but by profession and by brother and sisterhood. Absolutely. When I was blessed to become superintendent of Maryland State Police, my first year, in fact, I didn't even have a year as superintendent, when I got a phone call that Trooper Eddie Plank had been shot to death here on the Eastern Shore. And I responded, and the troops, along with allied agencies, rose to the occasion, caught the killers. I was blessed to be in a courthouse when the person who pulled the trigger was sentenced to death. That was subsequently overturned, but nevertheless. And 11 days later, Joe Lanzi was killed, Trooper Joe Lanzi, running on a man with a gun call in Northeast Maryland. This is 11 days after Eddie's death. So a lot of those 11 days were taken up with a funeral and a repast and so forth, supporting Eddie's family, and a funeral procession that was 25 miles long from Salisbury south. Honestly, I'd never seen anything like that. And of course, there were communities that supported the police, and many loved us, but I'd never seen such an outpouring of support like that. I was so overwhelmed with that. And then, not long after that, a trooper was killed hitting a bridge above him. And his dad was a Boston City K-9 officer. And so I'm at shock trauma, and my young trooper is being operated on. Monsignor Jeremiah Kenny is giving him his last rites. I'm right outside the surgical suite, and there's a window there, so I can see what's going on. And I see Dr. Tom Scalia. Probably many of you have heard that name, who every time I shake his hand I say I've been touched by an angel. Because he has a standing order. If it's police, fire, or EMS, and you're hurt going into shock trauma, he gets called to come in. He has saved dozens, hundreds of us over the years. But such wasn't to be the case for Raymond Armstead. And I saw the flurry of activity happening, and then I saw the activity die down. Dr. Scalia knew I was standing there at the window. And he walked over and he opened the door to the surgical suite, took off his mask, and he was crying. He said, I did the best I could. You'll never read that in a book. But I'm here to tell you, despite everything you hear in criticism of our profession today, there are many who love us.
Amen.
And such was the case. And I felt so awkward because I called Boston City and let them know that Raymond had passed away. His dad was a canine officer. He was working the street, actually. And he was sent home, and you can only know or think it could be one thing. And when he arrived home, the departmental chaplains were there and the Boston City command staff. And he was given my name and a number to call. And I had to tell him that Raymond had met his fate. The funeral in Boston was unbelievable. Raymond was getting ready to move his family down to Maryland. And he used to kid with his dad about state police cars look better than Boston City cars. Yeah. But the funeral, the church, you would have thought it was a Boston officer, a standing room only. And it's a little empty feeling when the final resting place is being handled by another police department. Massachusetts State Police, as I'm standing at the gravesite, had a horse with a Maryland State Police blanket, saddle, reverse boots. We don't have horses anymore. You know, we used to. I say we, MSP. That's what we do, because this is who we are. So after those deaths of Eddie and Joe, and the last trooper hero I buried, Eddie Toby, shot to death in Washington, D.C. After those, two of those four troopers were killed, you know, it hit me. I used to rely on C.O.P.S so much, Susie and everyone else, to provide support for the families. Well, C.O.P.S had moved. Susie's husband, Buzz, who retired from Prince George's County, and I worked the street with him, same squad. In fact, he was with me the night that Carol Davis Garrison was shot to death. We were on the same squad. In fact, Buzz almost got hit that night. They moved to Lake of the Ozarks. They're following their dream. So I realized, hey, we don't have a chapter in Maryland, so we got the papers ready and we filed them, and Governor Glenn Denning was a signer, and I was, and others. Our first president was Nancy Pajulia, whose husband John had been killed in line of duty in Prince George's County. I knew John, certainly know Nancy. Subsequently, Patty Fleming became president. Her husband Roger also served in Prince George's County and was a good friend and was killed in line of duty. And then Lisa Lancey, Joe Lancey's surviving spouse and family. And a quick story about the family. Joey, I signed a letter and sent it for Joey to get accepted into West Point. And he was on the football team. And I followed the stories about how he was doing while he was there and so forth. He graduated from West Point, went on to medical school through the Army. And I ended up retiring, and I was in Delaware, Secretary of Homeland Security, and I heard this story about a Maryland trooper who got activated as part of Iraqi freedom and had been shot and was medevaced to, I think, Ramstein or one of the other bases or posts in Germany. And the sergeant walked in and said, "I understand you're a Maryland trooper." And he shook his head and he said, "Yes." And Joey rolled his sleeve up, showed his dad's credentials, state police badge. God is good. We don't always agree with the decisions. But you know, we have another threat happening today. And as much as, you know, I've worked through the 60s and 70s and Vietnam protests and riots and so forth and killings of police officers, it's worse today than it's ever been. But here's where the enemy lies. It's an unseen enemy. It's COVID-19. That's killing more of us than gunfire, motor vehicle crashes, assaults, and all the other risks that we go through in this profession. So far, in 2020, 242 recorded deaths, COVID, 242. 2021 so far this year, 144. In Florida, 5 died in the same week, COVID. Now there is a presumption, it's rebuttable. You know, there's absolute presumptions that mean this is it, absolutely, you can't penetrate it, that's the way it is. Rebuttable presumptions go, okay, we'll presume that this is the case, but it can be rebutted through evidence and so forth. It's a rebuttable presumption that these are covered by the public safety officer's benefit. You're all familiar with what that happens to be. But that's not guaranteed. And having worked and represented a number of families pro bono over the years, I can tell you, we're probably in for a few hearings where we will appeal their decision. But the fact remains, regardless of your politics, let me draw an analogy. When I was appointed chief of police in 1990 in Prince George's County, I mandated that you must wear body armor. Now, I never wore body armor. There was no body armor. Well, there was body armor, but the guy was so bulky, it looked like a tank. He couldn't work the street in that. Come on. So I never had the benefit of that. But through the years, we did, thanks to DuPont for the development of Kevlar, and how many lives have been saved. But it was optional. And I said, I felt very strongly about this. I said, you know, we need to make this mandatory. And there was a hue and cry. And the FOP, and I'm a life member. Okay, I'm a card-carrying life member of the Fraternal Order of Police Lodge number 89. But I said at the time, the president used to be on the SWAT team for the police department. I said, really? And he said, well, you know, troops aren't happy. I said, oh, okay, out of 1,300, how many? Well, you know, I can't tell you how many. I said, probably fewer than 100. He doesn't say anything. I said, yeah, that's what I thought. Okay. Well, it's going to be mandatory because I will never hand over a flag to a surviving spouse or family and have them look at me and say, why didn't you make it mandatory? Now, it's going to sound like I'm Big Brother. Okay, good. Wear the vest. It'll save it won't save every life. It'll save a life under the right circumstances, and it's been proven. I dare say, regardless of your politics, that vaccines are proven. You know, when I was a kid, you didn't have a choice. Get a shot. I want to get a shot. Don't come to school. They send you home. More of that, go back and get the shot. Then we lucked out. I was so happy we got it on sugar cubes. Everybody, anybody get a sugar cube?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I hated needles. Oh yeah, give me that sugar cube. Yeah, I'm good. And we vaccinated our kids. I can tell you, when I went to Europe, to Germany, when my dad was just transferred there, I'm in the dispensary, and, to you Navy guys, you were lucky if you saw a corpsman, because you're not going to see a doctor. Come on. That's only for really serious stuff. Other than that, you're going to see some spec 4, somebody with one stripe, and they're going to diagnose whatever your problem is. So they got the list there, and they're going, oh, okay, diphtheria, smallpox. And my mother says, no, we're not going to Far East, we're going to Europe. So they had the sequence of shots. I said, oh, okay, over here, all right. Oh, okay, well, I'm going to do you a favor, kid. And getting them in both arms. That way, one arm won't fall off. Okay. Bang, 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 bang. It worked. It worked. I need your help. Think about it. Give encouragement where encouragement is needed. Most of my troops, not all, most of them, probably over 90%, are vaccinated. It's an individual choice. It is mandatory for the university. But, proof, one of our recruits coming into the academy didn't know he had symptoms, gave it to an instructor. The instructor didn't know she had symptoms, took it home. Her dad got it. She lived with her parents. Her dad died from it. That woke us up real fast. And for all those that we're losing now, more than any other cause, we need to give it some thought. We need to give it some thought. But we do live with risk. And you know what it's like to have those moments where, how do I go on? How do I survive? Oh God, I've had them. And I know you have too. And I draw inspiration from a lot of military heroes, World War II, Korea, Vietnam. One in particular that has intrigued me is Charlie Plumb. Charlie Plumb was a captain, and he graduated from Naval Academy right here in Annapolis. And he went on to be a fighter pilot, and he was flying the F-4 Phantoms in Vietnam off the Kitty Hawk, the aircraft carrier Kitty Hawk. And he's on his 75th mission, 5 days before he is to go home. They're bombing Hanoi, and he's shot down. Surface-to-air missile, boom. He ejected, he lands, he spends the next 2,103 days as a POW. Tortured, strung up, mentally harassed, painful episodes. Well, he was there for 6 years. He was able to help establish an underground communication system. For 2 of those years in the Hanoi Hilton, he was chaplain of the group. So he has a homecoming with the other POWs. He gets back to the United States, and he's sitting at dinner, and he notices a young guy comes looking at him, looking over at you. And so he noticed that, and this young man gets up and walks over and says, "You're Captain Charlie Plumb. You flew F-4s. You ejected over Vietnam. You were a POW. And now you're here. Can I shake your hand?" Well, Charlie's sitting there like, "How does this kid know all this about me?" And he said, "Of course." And he says, "Well, how do you know about me?" He says, oh, I know all about you. I packed your parachute. It hit Charlie. All the people you give thanks for. What about the poor, probably E2, below the sea line, in an aircraft carrier, on a long board, sorting the panels on the parachutes in the back. You know, and Charlie said, I never thought I'd get, I never knew who it was. I thought about it, I'm glad it worked. You know. And he was so taken that, the kid knew who he was, and he said, we keep track of our saves. And he thought about that. And he went on to say, you know, how many people packed a parachute for you in your life? I've had a lot of them. Man, I pulled that ripcord. It's like, I don't know what I'm gonna do. It worked. Everybody in this room packs parachutes for our profession. I know that. You send us off to work. You receive us when we get home. You call us to ask how we're doing. You mourn with us when one of us dies. There's parachute packers everywhere here. I want to thank you for that on behalf of our profession, because there's no finish line. There just isn't. This is an organization that, frankly, not many people ask to become a member of. You become a member through tragic circumstances. But our mission is very clear. Rebuilding shattered lives of survivors and coworkers affected by the line of duty deaths through the partnerships with law enforcement and the community. How do I keep going after 50 years? I'm looking around. I can see dozens of whys. I'm so humbled to be with you tonight. To our survivors, you've endured more pain than many of us could ever handle. Know this, 2 things survivors always need to know. Number 1, their loved one did not die in vain. Number 2, they will never be forgotten. We make that promise. I'm only too humbled to stand before you and say, I help maintain that as well. Thank you for having me tonight. God bless each and every one of you. Good luck. Godspeed. Thank you.